What a game we have teed up right after you finish breakfast Saturday morning, maybe even not done with breakfast on the West Coast, but even you guys out in Santa Monica, California, need to be watching this game. Arkansas, an 18-point dog, 18 and a half actually, against Georgia. Between the hedges there in Athens, noon kickoff Eastern time on ESPN. This matchup is why you can't afford to miss a week in college football. This particular matchup, Arkansas-Georgia, I want you to think about it. Where were you last year when they played? Do you remember when they played? They played to open the season. That was the DeJuan Mathis era. It lasted a few possessions for Georgia. We went through the entire preseason. You started to get a groundswell of confidence if you're a Georgia Bulldog fan that maybe it is DeJuan Mathis. Maybe he is the guy. Because Jamie Newman, he bailed on us. DeJuan Mathis was not the guy. And he was exposed very quickly, and you never heard from him again. And Stetson Bennett ended up coming in. But Georgia trailed them 7-5 at the half, is what I'm trying to tell you. How long ago does that feel? Arkansas goes on to do what they did last year. Georgia goes on to lose the East. So neither of them are playing for anything consequential in the last weekend of the season. And yet here they are. They're both undefeated. This is a top 10 matchup. Nobody in their right mind, or even some in their wrong mind, could have predicted that a year ago or even a few weeks ago, and yet here we are. Do not miss a week of college football. They give you spring, they give you summer. You can take care of all the things you need to do in your life then. You better not be missing a week or you miss a lot in this sport. How did Arkansas beat Texas A&M? Defense and what? What is in the second blank? If you're just a casual observer, you probably think, well, it's Arkansas, so they probably played good defense, and they probably ran the ball, right? Well, they did run the ball. They had a pretty good day on the ground. I think they ran it 49 times for 197 yards. That's about 4 yards per carry. It's a good day, but that's not vintage Arkansas. When Arkansas is rolling, they're peeling off 2.25, 275, maybe 300 on you. Ask Texas what it looks like when Arkansas is rolling. No. What beat Texas A&M last week was defense, and it better be there again this week, but it was explosive plays through the air. And it didn't take 5 or 6 of them. It was a couple of explosive touchdown plays through the air, one of them like 80 yards, one of them about 50 yards, and they won. They won 20-10. So Georgia is a very good defensive team. I'm not going to waste time telling you what you already know. Here's what I do want to know. To what degree will Georgia have success stopping the run? Because there's a big difference between limiting Arkansas to something like 68 total yards rushing, at which point Arkansas has no shot of winning this, or limiting them to 145 yards rushing, with which point a complementary approach could have Arkansas in the game in the fourth quarter with a chance to win it. That's question number one. Now I got to get to this talking point out there that exists about Georgia, mainly those of you who despise the program, and you would tell me, well, yeah, Georgia's 4-0, but they hadn't really played anybody. They haven't played anybody. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Doesn't really mean anything, guys, because if I put the Bucks, or who's the best team in the NFL? If I put the Rams right now in college football, but I had them play a few FCS teams, you'd have half of y'all out there say, the Rams haven't played anybody. Okay, but they'd be favored by 40 over every college football team. It's possible for you not to have played anyone and you also be really good. And in Georgia's case, please be real. I know Clemson's underachieving. Clemson's a legitimate football team, so let's please not pretend like they aren't. And the second part to that is Georgia's done exactly what you're supposed to do when you play inferior teams. They've beating them into a coma. Beating them into a coma is exactly what you're supposed to do. That's what all the great teams do. And so you haven't played anyone's all relative. Is it possible they're a little bit overhyped? Yeah. I told you earlier this week, I think they are a little overhyped. But you know what could be true here? Georgia could be overhyped and still be the best team in the country for all I know. I've absolutely got them as at least the number 2 team in the country. But they haven't played anyone is not a sound argument for why someone will or won't win a game this Saturday. You're looking at their schedule right now if you're watching on YouTube. I'll tell you what people did not expect. What people did not expect is perhaps their biggest challenge until the Florida game to be coming in week 4. Maybe week 5 on the road at Auburn. Maybe if Kentucky gets it together week 6, it wasn't going to be against Arkansas in week 4. Like, what's Arkansas going to do? Well, let's talk about what they're going to do. Because I think it's going to be reasonable to expect Georgia to struggle establishing any kind of consistent ground game. That is something that, if you're going to nitpick, has been a little bit of an issue for them this year. Not all the time, but some of the time. And Arkansas, their average age is like 31 years old up front. So they're going to do a good job. Are the Arkansas Razorbacks limiting the run? But as we saw against A&M last week, you could limit the run and then pop one on you. That could be the difference in the game. Now, it wasn't last week, but all it takes is missing one gap on one play, and you can shut them out the rest of the afternoon. Someone peels 75 on you, goes to the house. Sometimes it doesn't matter. I think Arkansas is going to be okay in run defense, and it's reasonable to expect Georgia to maybe struggle, maybe not hang 200 of their own on the ground, but it's also reasonable, I think, to expect JT Daniels in this passing game to have a relatively high amount of success between the 20s. I don't think that's where the game will be won. That's why I'm ceding that point. What I do think is imperative for both teams, it would be very, very beneficial if they could score on explosive plays. Because to be honest with you, I don't have a whole lot of faith at the moment in either of them, knowing what the other defense possesses, if we're trying to win the game down in the red zone. Like red zone offense, and therefore red zone defense, will entirely decide this game. Now, there are a few more things that Arkansas needs to have happen that Georgia would just like to have happen. But one of the things that could turn this very quickly is you either turning it over on downs, missing field goals, or settling for threes when the other guy's putting sevens on the board. The red zone is going to be where this game's won and lost. Some things to keep in mind before we get to the pick here. Last week, early in this game against Texas A&M, Arkansas, as I said, popped a couple of deep balls. And I know that coaching staff at Georgia has two things. Number one, they really like to be physical and aggressive, and they like to get in your face and play man coverage. But then the second part has to be that you have to have an opponent-specific game plan. And if I were looking at Arkansas and I were knowing that I think I can limit their run because I have a bunch of small houses along my defensive line, I'm not so sure I wouldn't soften up coverage a little bit. I'm not so sure, I know this is a dirty word for Kirby Smart, I'm not so sure zone wouldn't be more the order of the day for me. And at that point, if KJ Jefferson still beats you over the top, then that's all well and good. We've seen Georgia, though, with the approach they normally take, they'll give up a deep ball. They'll give up a couple of deep balls. And Kirby Smart will meet you in the postgame press conference, and he'll just say, look, I tipped my cap to them. They made a good throw. They dropped it in the bucket. Like, that's college football, man. Well, yeah, it is. But that's normally when you're playing a more potent and versatile offense. And I don't know how versatile Arkansas is going to be Saturday because I don't know how healthy and how ready to run the ball 15 times KJ Jefferson will be. And so because of that, I'm interested to see how aggressive Georgia is at corner because there'll be a couple of matchups Arkansas looks to expose and looks to attack. And they could have some success if you're overly aggressive. So that's point number one. Point number two, how off balance can Barry Odom keep JT Daniels? And by that, I mean, how many 2nd and 9s, how many 3rd and 7s can we force? How many obvious passing downs can we get him in to the point where you give your defense an opportunity to force mistakes? Because you could say, if you wanted to, devil's advocate style, you could say about JT Daniels, the guy has really not had to have his feet in the fire in the fourth quarter against a legitimate defense. Like last year in the Mississippi State game, that was the situation. But I don't know that that was the caliber of opponent that they're facing right now. So you could say that. The Cincinnati game notwithstanding, it was a weird dynamic. You could say that. That doesn't mean he's not capable of it. It just means maybe we haven't seen the situation yet. Thirdly, and this is one I saved for the end on purpose, you're going to have a lot of people who pick Georgia tell you they're picking Georgia because of the physical mismatch. Because physically, Arkansas's bread and butter is not something that matches up well against Georgia. Oh, I agree with that. I agree they're not going to out-physical Georgia. But let me tell you what I also think that's probably going to raise some eyebrows. I don't think Georgia's going to physically manhandle them at all. I don't think there's going to be any point in this game where Arkansas wilts, is what I'm telling you. Georgia can lean all they want to. Arkansas can match the physicality enough to where they make it a four-quarter game. You know, Georgia, you can walk off the field having won 31-23, but also look over and say, wow, I mean, they withstood it. We thought they could withstand it for a half, maybe 3 quarters, but look at them. They're still over there standing right now. We got a judge's decision over here. We did not get the TKO. That's more the kind of game Georgia's going to have to win Saturday. If you think you're about to go in there, I don't care how many 5-stars you got on your roster. I've seen Arkansas in person. Like, I know what that team's about. You're not bullying them or pushing them off the field. You're not leaning on them until they collapse. That's not the way Georgia's going to win. Precision, execution, you do have a superior roster. You absolutely do have that. But they got a lot of stuff over in their corner that is more than capable of withstanding it for 4 quarters. So with that in mind, Jesse, this is a fat point spread. Let's take a look at what Vegas says and what the model says. I was listening to Jake Rowe and Kip and Rusty on the Dogs 24/7 podcast earlier today, and they were kind of flummoxed. You know how rarely I use that word. I think Rusty uses it all the time, but flummoxed were they at this point spread, being all the way up where it is. If you're not watching right now, Caesars has it Georgia minus 18.5. Our model is just short of that. We got Georgia minus 17.5. And there's a lot of speculation out there that this number must be so high because KJ Jefferson is questionable. That's not the case. The case is just flat out odds makers would power rate Georgia when you factor in home field being whatever they want to factor. Let's just say 3 points. They just view them as that much better. I mean, every position group, if you don't understand the odds making process, every position group is power rated. And there are enough margins of plus 1.5 points, plus 2 3/4 points per position unit group that Georgia has, that's what it adds up to. It's not necessarily rocket science, but most people don't understand the odds making process. And I know it looks big. Like, I know that point spread looks big. My advice to you, if you think it's too big, is very simple. Open a sportsbook account and bet Arkansas. That's what we're going to do. Not hastily. This is not going to be a ramen noodle express pick, but I'll take Georgia to win. I do think it's a few too many points. The model is almost dead on the money. I think more along the lines of Georgia, by 2 touchdowns, Georgia by 13, something like that. And that'd be a really good win for Georgia, by the way. So don't think just because they don't cover a really, really high line, they've underachieved. You're going to have to pay a premium to take Georgia or Alabama the rest of the year, in case you haven't noticed with the first 2 spreads. But I'll take Georgia to win. I will take Arkansas to cover.